Welcome to the Kamm lecture for November 7th, 2012. I'm Linda Bluso. I'm chair of the business division, and I'd like to welcome all of you today. I have the honor of introducing Tom Waltermire. Tom joined Team NEO in March of 2006 as its CEO, following a 31-year career with major Northeast Ohio corporations, B.F. Goodrich, the Geon Company, Poly One. Tom served as chairman and CEO of both Geon and Poly One. A native of Akron, Ohio, Tom joined B.F. Goodrich in 1974 following degrees from The Ohio State University and Harvard Business School. He held a range of financial, operating, and general management positions until becoming Geon's CFO when it spun off from B.F. Goodrich in 1993. 7 years later, as Geon's CEO, Tom led the formation of the $3 billion Poly One Corporation when Geon acquired Cleveland-based M.A. Hanna Corporation. He served as Poly One's CEO from its formation until late 2005, a record-earning year for Poly One. Now Tom serves on the board of directors of Westfield Bank, Flow Polymer, Alshear Titania, and Collaborant, Inc. Tom's active engagement in economic development in Northeast Ohio and the state of Ohio includes having served as chair of NORTEC, that's the Northeast Ohio Regional Technology Consortium, and on the executive committees and boards of Cleveland Tomorrow, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Jumpstart, and the Ohio Business Roundtable. Tom is the founding chair of the Ohio Polymer Strategic Council and has been appointed by 2 Ohio governors to Ohio's Third Frontier Advisory Board, a major state initiative in technology-based economic development. Tom also currently serves on the boards of the Cleveland Orchestra, Idea Stream, and our own Baldwin Wallace University. So please join me in welcoming Tom Waltermire.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Linda, thank you very much. Thank you all very much. And thank you for coming today. Very much appreciate that. And this is my favorite subject, to talk about what's happening in Northeast Ohio, the opportunities that we all have to do so much better than we're doing today. And delighted that we've got a mixture of people who have seen a lot of the changes in Northeast Ohio, as well as a lot of students who are experiencing Northeast Ohio in a new way today. This is the usual way that I talk. I don't ever use teleprompters. I'm terrible with scripts. I just like to tell a story, and I like to do it visually. I am going to be flying through a bunch of things up here, a lot of slides. And we're going to move along, because I'm not going to talk about everything that's on them necessarily. So this is to give you an impression and a story about economic development, our region, the things that we are doing to improve the economy, and a bit about some of the realities of our big region that we have here, some of the opportunities we have, and I think the critical nature of continuing to hone our ability to collaborate so that we can keep innovating for our economy. One of the things I often start with, and I think people who have lived around here for some time will probably painfully remember, is some of you, are you numb yet from the annual story in the Plain Dealer about how the city of Cleveland is one of the 5 poorest, maybe the number 1, number 2, but always typically in the top 5 poorest cities in the United States? You heard about that? How many of you, by the way, actually live inside the city of Cleveland? Nobody here lives inside the city of Cleveland. Very interesting. So when you hear that, when you read that story, do you somehow feel that that story is about you? Or do you say, oh, well, that's Cleveland. I don't live in Cleveland, so what's that got to do with me? You probably think it says something about you. And amazingly, even fairly far from the city of Cleveland, people tend to think that way. So in the early years of my working with Team NEO, we were confronted with that. And of course, that's not a very good image thing, right? A poor city. We said, well, heck, that's just about the city of Cleveland. Why don't we look at the region? And why don't we look at how per capita income compares with other parts of the United States? So we actually put together with our crack research team this little analysis that ranked every metropolitan area in the United States from top to bottom and looked at them on per capita income. And we said, well, let's put on here the metropolitan areas of the region as well as the region as a whole. And let's see who else is in that territory. And so what we see here is that this is the Cleveland metropolitan area. So it includes 5 counties. And as you can eyeball on here, the Cleveland metropolitan area is in the top 20% of per capita income. So we have a situation here where 2 things are true that you would think are completely contradictory. The city, inside the city limits of Cleveland, we have one of the 5 poorest cities in the United States. If you take the metropolitan area, which we tend to think of in a broad sense as Cleveland, in a broad way, it's in the top 20% of income. Both of those are true at the same time. So it all depends on your perspective. And it's a fascinating contrast in local issues, regional issues, and how they all blend together. Interesting, of course, many of the people who raise the per capita income of Greater Cleveland don't live in Cleveland, but they commute into Cleveland every day. What's that mean? How do you think about that? So when you talk about these geographies, these kind of dilemmas come up. And speaking of commuting, here's another little analysis that we did. And this takes a look at, by county, we have 16 counties here, I think. And what we looked at is the percent of the workforce every day that comes from a different county. So you can see out here we're in the 30 to even out to the 40% range of the people working in that county, whether they come from someplace else. And over on this side, we look at the percent of residents who leave their county to go work in another county. Now remember, these are counties. It's not people commuting between cities. These are people moving between counties. My favorite up here is Geauga County, where more than half of the people who live in Geauga County leave Geauga County to go to work. But it's not because there isn't anything to do, because nearly half of the workforce in Geauga County comes from someplace else. So they must have a very big budget for roads, because they're just crisscrossing every day, leaving and coming and going. And the point of all this is what it says at the top. We live and work as a region. Imagine how big those percentages would be if we did it based on cities. Because of course they're smaller. So you have even more people coming and going from one city to another. But by golly, we sure get very parochial about what's happening inside our cities. We run into this all the time when Team NEO attracts a new company here. And the mayor, maybe of another city where the company did not land, is all mad because the company didn't land there. And if it's not too far away, I'll say, well, how many of your residents you think might have the opportunity to work at the company 10 miles away? Do you think your residents think this is a bad idea? Or are you just mad about it because you're not going to get the taxes from it? So do you care about people, or do you care about your city budget? Well, they have to care about both. And I understand why they get parochial, because they have a city budget. They got to raise taxes. They have to generate taxes to pay for services. So they're mad when they're not there, but their people can get a job. They should be very happy about that. So we live and work as a region, and we move around a lot. And those 2 charts I find fascinating, and they're a perspective that essentially people don't see. You don't hear about this kind of stuff. Another way you look at our region compared to the United States, not the United States, the rest of Ohio. These days, the state of Ohio, for economic development purposes, has the state carved up into 6 regions. And we, of course, are Northeast Ohio. And while those may look fairly equal geographically, kind of spatially, as it says up there, 5 of Ohio's 10 largest counties for employment are in Northeast Ohio. And they have, in fact, 1, 2, and 3, Cuyahoga County, Franklin County with Columbus, and Hamilton County, Cincinnati, with number 4 being Summit County with Akron. Even more interestingly from a cultural perspective is the official federally designated metropolitan areas that we have across the state. And these are generally identified by labor sheds, where people live and where they work, but they also tend to be somewhat historical. And a community, once it's designated as a metropolitan statistical area, doesn't like to lose that designation. So Canton and Akron are, the downtowns are like, 18 miles apart or something like that. But they're actually, as far as the federal government's concerned, 2 separate metropolitan areas. And Canton doesn't want to lose that. They still like to be viewed that way. But look at all the metropolitan areas we have in Northeast Ohio compared to these other places. Look at Central Ohio. One big city, and just about everything else there of size all grew by sprawl outside of Columbus. In Northeast Ohio, what makes us so interesting into this subject of collaborating is that we are made up of distinct communities that all grew up independently of each other. The metropolitan area of Akron did not grow out of Cleveland. When Dr. Goodrich landed there, or got off the train there and decided to put his fire hose company there, it wasn't because Cleveland was nearby. He did it all by himself. And so you have these, in Northeast Ohio, we are a very unusual place. It's quite unusual across the country to find so many independently generated larger metropolitan areas all near each other. And that's because of the economic boom that happened here that was going on 100 years ago. And these communities all grew up by themselves. And so here we are today in pretty close proximity, but each of these communities have a different heritage, different history. They think of themselves very distinctly. Social systems are different, the nonprofit organizations are separate, and so people operate in these little areas, but economically they're all similar, and on Sunday afternoons in the fall, they're all united. Even if the team they're cheering for doesn't win. They all complain together, right? So you guys told me before that none of you live in the city of Cleveland. When you travel somewhere, fairly far away, Chicago or, Atlanta or Texas, how many, and somebody says where you're from, how many of you say I'm from Cleveland? No, you're not. What the heck are you saying you're from Cleveland for? We all do that. The people in Akron actually do that too. They don't like to admit it, but if they're far enough away, they'll say, I'm from Cleveland. And if that registers, they'll say, oh, actually, I'm from Akron. I do that all the time. I've lived in Akron for 55 years. That's what I do. Because you start with what you think people will know. And so this identity of who we are gets all wrapped up into this collaboration thing. And I've given you some examples here of how we're connected, but how we're separate, and we have laws that chop us up into pieces. In those counties up there, there are something approaching 600 legal municipal governments of some kind. They're either a city or a township or a village. 600 chopped up little jurisdictions with somebody elected to worry about only what happens inside that area, because that's their job. That's their legal job, to worry what happens inside that little area. One of our problems. We got way too many of those. But that's where collaboration all comes in. So we'll try to pick up the pace here. So we deal with this in the state of Ohio all the time. They look at these 6 regions, they all think they're kind of the same, and we say, oh no, they're not. Northeast Ohio represents 35 to 40% of about every demographic you can think of. And we have polar opposites of what we have. We have 41% of Ohio's minority population. That's not bad, but we know it tends to have more challenges because the minority population tends to have more disadvantaged people in them. At the same time, our region captures more than half of the awards from Ohio's Third Frontier program, which is our technology investment program in the state. More than half of that money comes to Northeast Ohio, which says something about the technology base we have here. So we've got these great contrasts in our region, but we are by far and away the biggest. Now, let's think about the history of this area. This actually goes back to the early 1800s, and its population. Now, population and economy tend to be closely correlated. Of course, with productivity, you can grow your economy and not grow the population, but by and large, they tend to grow together. And look at that track. You know, we really started taking off in the late 1800s, started growing faster. Look how much faster we grew population-wise than the rest of the United States during that, you know, almost a 60-year period of time. And then we hit 1970. And not to pick on that individual year, but about that time, and whoosh, flatline. Something started changing. How many of you are marketing people? Anybody taking some marketing courses in business, done a little bit of that? You ever heard of the product life cycle curve? This look at all familiar of a product life cycle curve? This is actually what was going on. New technology, rapid growth, maturity. The question is, what happens at the next phase? Does it go whoosh, does it go down, or does it go up to another curve? I believe we're laying the foundation now for a new curve. But where did this come from? Who created the first growth curve? Anybody have any idea what this is? I actually showed this slide to the entrepreneur program here several months back, or maybe even a year ago. Anybody have any idea what that is? It's a windmill. It is a wind turbine. It's not only a wind turbine, it is the first wind electricity generator ever constructed. And it was built by the very famous Charles Brush. And this was actually in his backyard on Euclid Avenue. His neighbors probably weren't real happy. But he thought it was kind of cool. He actually ran his house, electricity, with this thing. And he was one of the few people in the city of Cleveland that had an electrified house. And he did this himself. It was because of Charles Brush that Public Square in Cleveland was the first public place in the United States to have electric lights. Charles Brush, not nearly as well known. His name carries on in various places, but a inventor on a par with Thomas Edison and what he did. Here's some other names. Henry Timken. You heard of the Timken roller bearing company? Henry Timken moved here from St. Louis because this automobile industry was starting to take off, and he thought maybe his idea for tapered roller bearings might be useful. Dr. Benjamin Franklin Goodrich. Dale Kramer and I got to know the story of in our days working at at B.F. Goodrich, Uncle Benny, so we called him sometimes. He actually had a fire hose company in western New York, and he was following the old dictum of heading west. And an economic developer talked him into getting off the train in Akron. And while he was there, they told him that they would give him some property, and they had some land near this canal that was going through the area. And he decided to stay in Akron, with his fire hose company. That was the beginning of the rubber industry in Akron. All started with Dr. Benjamin Franklin Goodrich getting off a train in Akron and deciding to put his fire hose company there. Everything in rubber in Akron all grew out of that. One guy. That's why economic development is so important. We do those things. Henry Sherwin, that's Sherwin-Williams, came here to form his paint company. All these people did this. Now think, and Dr. Goodrich did this in about 1870 is when the company was formed, B.F. Goodrich Company, and the others were in the same kind of time. Imagine, even if you couldn't name all of them, imagine how many sources of help there are today for businesses. How many of those you suppose were there then? Not much. Shouldn't we be even doing better than they are? With all the help that we have out there? So why don't we have higher expectations for ourselves? Because these guys created that rapid growth curve. So what's going on in there? And that's why I'm not going to read all these words. But we were clearly, you saw the growth curve. In the late 1800s, the first half of the 20th century, we were the Silicon Valley of that era. It was the tremendous industrial boom, created all kinds of community wealth, cultural and intellectual assets. Do you know that the Cleveland Museum of Art has such a large endowment for art acquisition that in a typical year, the Cleveland Museum of Art acquires 1/3 of all the art that is acquired by art museums in the United States. And it's not nearly as big a museum as New York or in Washington because they're very choosy, and the very best art dealers come there to sell their pieces. Where'd that come from? That wealth. That's where it came from. And that's why we have such an incredible asset. And look at all these other things that we have here. This other list, new technology-driven economy that's coming out of the assets that were created back in that time. And I talk a lot about Akron because I grew up there and know the story of the rubber industry so well. The University of Akron was very prominent in helping the tire companies grow. Today, that same base is being used for more advanced polymers, electrical conducting, light conducting polymers. Same asset repurposed to something different. These kinds of things happen over long periods of time. The famous Research Triangle in North Carolina was founded in the late 50s. Silicon Valley really traces its roots to the 1930s. So these things are very long developing cycles. And the reality is, and I don't know if any of you have come here from one of the new economies cities. I hear this from people who come here from Texas or from North Carolina. They look at this and they say, my gosh, you have a wealth of things that we could never even dream of having where I came from. And we mope around here and think somehow we got a big problem. It's because we don't appreciate what we have. But what's going on is that assets that were created in one era are now being repurposed for new purposes. And I firmly believe a new growth curve is going to be emerging. Not as rapidly as that last one, of the first one, because you started from a small base and grew a lot. But one is clearly coming. Now, we think about trying to help the region move along faster. I talked about the MSAs, all the metropolitan areas. We're kind of a funny place, and you need to think about Northeast Ohio as almost like a federation of major cities. And I don't think I'll go through all these steps in here, but we can actually document more than 30 years of initiatives to try to get those metropolitan areas working together. Because if it was close enough together, people would, especially business people, would say, well, my gosh, I'm living in, one part, working in another part. We just ought to be doing more together. But nobody knew how to do it. So what do you do? It seems like a good idea, but what do you do? Because all the laws are set up to do everything by these legal municipalities. That's the way we're set up. In 1997, probably one of the more successful things was formed called the Regional Business Council. and two gentlemen who have become since then ambassadors in the United States, Tim Timken and John Ong from the Timken Company and B.F. Goodrich, and Dick Pogue from Jones Day actually formed the Regional Business Council. It lasted for 5 years, and they disbanded in about 2000 because they said, we're not sure what to do. We just know we should get together and try to cooperate, but what do we cooperate on? What do you do every day? And so it sort of fell apart, and actually out of that, Team NEO was created with a very, kind of a fairly narrow mission. In the early 2000s, other regional initiatives got started, Nortec, Bioenterprise, Jumpstart. We'll talk about them a little bit. Team NEO eventually became a business attraction organization, and now Jobs Ohio, new state of Ohio initiative, has come along and is encouraging Team NEO to be even more of a hub for all this. In the last 10 years, the point of this is, in the last 10 years, we have gone from having a group of the most senior business leaders quit because they didn't know what to do, to today we have this. Now, that may look like a mess, but basically almost everything up here is now a regional initiative with staff that works every day on some kind of economic development. And down here in this, in the southwest corner here, we actually have our chambers of commerce of the big cities, of course, who have been here for a long time. Everything else on here has largely been invented or reinvented in the last 10 years as a regional program. We have Magnet that works with manufacturers. We have the Commission on Economic Inclusion to make sure that minorities are brought more into the economy. We've got two groups over here who work with entrepreneurs at Jumpstart and Bioenterprise. We got Team NEO doing business attraction and working with Jobs Ohio. Nobody was trying to attract new businesses here 10 years ago. If they did, it was a minor effort. And up there at the top, you have Nortec, whose job is to look for new technology clusters and help them get started. So what we've done over the last 10 years is figure out very specific things that make sense to do in the region. And in Team NEO itself, we have 4 functions. Regional Economic Development Strategy, which is there to bring all this together. Business Attraction, which I've mentioned. We also then have the interface with the state of Ohio, and we work formally to try to bring collaboration across all those economic development groups. The Jobs Ohio came out of it, was a creation of the state. There was something called the Ohio Department of Development for many years. It was divided into these 2 pieces. This is still inside state government. This is actually a nonprofit sitting outside state government, and they now have more flexibility and they can just do more things more nimbly than the state government can do. We have the 6 regions with Team NEO in charge in Northeast Ohio, and they've now asked us to do all these different things, from strategy to attraction, growing businesses, stimulating entrepreneurship. But that network that I show with all those bubbles is how we do it. Team NEO doesn't do all that. Nobody, it'd be crazy for one organization to try to do all this. But we have a network of organizations, and again, that requires collaboration. You have to figure out how to work together. So, I wanted to quickly go through 3 examples of things that are going on in the region that are very concrete examples of how you can collaborate across a region for everybody's greater good. And we'll start with business attraction, which is something Team NEO does. So how do we go about selling the region? First of all, our number one thing is to make, remember I said there was hundreds of municipalities? Imagine you're a company in Phoenix, Arizona, or worse yet, outside the United States, and you're deciding you have to have some kind of operation in the Great Lakes area somewhere, and you think Ohio might be a possibility. Where do you start? Who do you know? It's a very daunting task because you don't even know what's here. So our number one job is to make it easy for a company to learn about the region. That's what we do fundamentally, and we help identify all the assets they need for all the various things you have to solve in order to run a business in a new place. For those of you in marketing, have you ever seen a sales funnel before? Those of you even who haven't studied it may run into these sometimes in your career. It's all about, you start by creating impressions and you take a deal all the way to the finish line where you have to actually close the sale. The interesting thing about attracting a new company to the region is that we can create all kinds of impressions about how great Northeast Ohio is, but you don't just come to Northeast Ohio, you have to pick an address. A company has to pick an address. Any of you just came here for some reason to be in this region might say, hey, I like being in Greater Cleveland, but where am I going to live? You got to pick a place. And so we may start regionally, but the local community has got to close the deal. Another kind of collaboration. It's kind of a handoff from a regional initiative to a local sale. And you have to learn how to work together in order to make that happen. We actually have formal strategies in each of these areas where we generate business opportunities from. This would be, as an advertisement for the business division, if you have anybody here, Linda, who writes cases, this would be by far and away the best marketing case you could ever write. There are more issues in here about how you market and how you target in a thoughtful, business-like way. Of course, you have to have a brand name. Our brand name is Cleveland Plus, and the plus serves two particular purposes. One is it's more than Cleveland. It's Cleveland plus Akron plus Canton plus Youngstown. It's also an attitude. We believe in ourselves. We're positive, even if that isn't so true. It should be. So we're putting out there that we believe in ourselves. When we go outside the area, we actually, that's the name we use for our area. We call this region Cleveland Plus. When you guys travel, get back to the travel question, and people ask you where you're from, and a lot of you said you're from Cleveland. Have any of you ever said to somebody hundreds of miles away from here, and they say where you're from, have you ever said Northeast Ohio? Okay, we got at least, Phil's at least nodding his head. When you've done that, what reaction do you get? Like, what do you mean? Like, where's that? Or what's there? And you probably say, oh, well, that's where Cleveland is. Oh, okay, well, why didn't you say so? That's another identity problem. What do we call ourselves when we go away from home? If you're living in Akron, keep picking on them, you don't particularly like it if you're going out and saying I'm from Cleveland, because you're not from Cleveland, but you just use that for shorthand. But if you say Northeast Ohio, nobody knows where you're from. So what you call yourself is even a problem in this stuff. How do you get people to agree on what we call ourselves when we go away from home to try to sell a company? These interesting problems, because it's not just economic, it's cultural and social, and all those things blend together. So we market ourselves in business attraction in a number of ways, bring people here, hit conferences, do research on companies that are growing, try to find ones that we can convince to do their next layer of growth in our region. And the hardest part is finding the companies. That's why this is an interesting marketing problem. What do we sell? Location is number one. If you're in Europe, the easiest thing you can do to sell this area is, look, so where's your part of Ohio? Where's Cleveland Plus? Well, we're halfway between New York and Chicago, and our costs are lower. Ah, that sounds like someplace I ought to go check out. Because we are, in fact, one day away from about half of the economy of North America. And it's the number one asset we have, is our location. We also sell our, and I'm really glad Baldwin Wallace is on this slide. We also sell our higher education base. 200,000 students in 25 plus institutions in Northeast Ohio. But companies just don't draw from here. It's not so much to think you might draw from 2 hours away, let's say, 150 miles. 1 million students in higher education within 2 hours of Northeast Ohio, more or less 2 hours. We could pick up Detroit, Columbus, Pittsburgh. Huge base of talented people being generated every year. Our workforce is changing dramatically. This looks at education attainment. I went into the workforce in the mid-1970s, and I still find it astounding that in 1980, that a third of our workforce had less than a high school education. I don't think of that being true then. Today, that's down to 16, 17%. If you look at some college or bachelor's degree, look at those two orange bars, and I think that's right. I think this is the slide that was reversed. We now have nearly half of our population with some college or a college degree, where in 1980 it was maybe about 25%. So the skill level of this region is going up, and we sell that. We of course have these industry sectors that are prominent, like biomedical, or the advanced energy area, or our famous polymer and coatings industry with world famous names in all these areas, and we promote those. The latest big development, of course, is the shale deposits that are in eastern Ohio. But this chart here actually is, every one of those dots on there is actually a gas or oil well that has been drilled sometime in the last 150 years. So this oil and gas that we're now taking advantage of in eastern Ohio, we've been doing this for a long time. We're just drilling deeper. And so this has been, and in fact, in the early 1900s, you ever heard of the Standard Oil Company? John D. Rockefeller, you heard of that? Cleveland was the center of the world oil industry in the early 1900s. Cleveland was the center of the oil industry. All because of that. And we're now going 2 miles underground to get to the actual reserve. In those days, we were just poking shallow holes and finding oil and gas. This is the Ohio Department of Development's, or the natural resource map of where the heaviest deposits are expected to be, right on the doorstep of our region. It's going to be a huge thing. These are investments that are going on already that are shale related. There are thousands of jobs being created here. And look at the size of these investments that are going on. And you can see by the names, a lot of these are in our traditional companies, which is huge. And that doesn't even count nearly $3 billion of checks that have been written to property owners for lease rights on their property. Huge influx of wealth in the region. So far, we've only drilled 129 over the last year or so. 2 years from now, or let's even be conservative and say 3 years, expectations we will be drilling 1,000 wells per year. And that is expected to continue for some period of time. The effect of this is going to be gigantic on our region. What are people saying? These are actual quotes that we get at Team Neo from companies before they come and visit us, or consultants before they come and visit us, and what they say now. Look at some of these. Look at the one up at the very top. The usual thing, it's a rust belt. There's nothing interesting going on there. High costs, kind of going nowhere. And when they come and visit us, look at what they say. Place to support expansion, more diverse than previously thought. Probably will come back and bring customers here. If people come and see the area, they say, this place has a lot more going on than what I thought. So we've got this perception issue. In Team Neo's business attraction work, we've attracted 63 companies since 2007 on behalf of the region, all pulling together, sharing resources, having a common story. And those are the names of the companies, which I'm not obviously going to talk about, but the point of this slide is they could have gone anywhere and they came here, and if they made that choice, why don't we feel better about ourselves? So who's wrong? The people who talked down this area or these companies? Did these companies make a mistake? Hopefully not. Probably not. But we tend to say more negative things about ourselves than we should. And these people should be the proof statement that that's not right. So, regional marketing as another initiative. We're the 5th anniversary of the Cleveland Plus campaign. So why did we do this? Well, other people were out hustling us. We did this study in 2005. We're being outspent, out-hustled to go out and tell that story. The before and after slide, you can go forever just trying to convince the people who show up here that this is a great place, but how about going out and telling people that this is a good thing? That's what this campaign is all about, and it has these various objectives from attracting business and attracting talent, getting the right kind of media coverage. It was formed by the great, this was actually formed originally as a Cleveland marketing campaign, and we decided formally to make it regional and attract support to do that. When we launched the campaign, it was a very cool idea. We actually got Continental to donate an airplane that would fly at only 5,000 feet over the region, and we got business and community leaders to all get on the plane, and the metaphor, of course, was when you look down, you don't see any boundaries. It all just sort of blends together. And that's the way we launched the program, to remind people that we're connected and that we are together. So what have we been doing since then? Well, we've talked about business attraction. We use this campaign for business attraction. We now have the best media coverage among all of our Midwestern peers because we go out and sell the area. 40% increase in positive coverage of the region nationally. And by the way, the gladly departed political campaign was a tremendous benefit for this region that we could never have spent enough money to get. 4 years ago, when the economy was heading south, we were the poster child for how everything's falling apart. Big foreclosure problems. I mean, they came here in the hundreds, media people, to do a story about how Northeast Ohio and Cleveland was where everything was terrible. Now they come and the story is, gee, we hear you're doing better than the rest of the country. Your unemployment rate's a full percentage point less than the national average. Why is that? What's going on? We've been flooded with media coverage, including from around the world. I did a live news broadcast last Friday evening to London on London TV. And the point of the story was, why is Ohio doing better now than the rest of the country? How can you ever get enough money in advertising to replace that? And part of this is because we've been out selling the story. So here's an interesting quote from a very prominent researcher in economic development from the Brookings Institute, Bruce Katz. I think it's fundamental in this century for regions to market and brand themselves. What is so attractive about the Cleveland Plus campaign is that it represents a consortium of institutions that are collaborating to compete. Stay with it. And remember, 10 years ago, the most prominent CEOs in this region quit meeting because they didn't know what they could do together. And today we're doing this, and it's because we figured out what to do together. And not worry about all our individual communities, but what can you actually do as a region? So finally, well, I told you one of the things that Team NEO is responsible for, and if you really want to pull all this stuff together, you have to have some kind of strategy. You can't just have a whole bunch of initiatives. Why do you have those initiatives? Where do they come from? What's the purpose of all of them? How do they relate to each other? What are the goals that you want to have? So we actually are in the midst right now of creating a regional competitiveness strategy, and it's got this objective: a market-based, regionally shared vision and actionable plan, which is the hard part, to try to move the region forward and to integrate local and regional priorities. Because we're never going to eliminate the priorities of all those individual political units. It's completely valid for them to have their own goals, but you have to be able to bring them together and integrate them. And what we're doing right now in particular is trying to get business and the philanthropic sector, foundations, on the same page with the same priorities, so we invest in economic development together. We've done a lot of economic analysis, and this is not a very happy story. This is the economic output of Northeast Ohio by 5-year increments compared to the United States. The U.S. is in the green, Northeast Ohio is in brown. This goes back to the late 1970s, and look how we've lagged in every 5-year period growth rate other than the early 90s, which was really kind of a recovery period, and we often do reasonably well out of the bottom, but then we tend to slow down. It's that life cycle thing. When you're at the mature part of the life cycle, you tend not to grow as fast. And so we've got to get off of this curve. We've got to get back to growing at least as fast as the country as a whole. And so, again, that's why you have a strategy. And we have guiding principles for that, being global, sustaining it with lots of partners, strengthening all communities, making sure it's economically inclusive. The goals we've set have to do with growth and income. Not surprisingly, we've got to get closer to the national average on growth. We've got to raise our per capita income. And I don't have the slide in here, but in the 70s and 80s, the per capita income of Northeast Ohio was higher than the national average. Today, we're starting to see places where we've lost that lead. And that's not a good sign. So we have to keep increasing the value of the work we do here. So far, we have identified as a broad framework 10 areas to attack on a collaborative basis. And the first 3 up there look at the business world in 3 different types. Major industries, what we call our driver industries, emerging industries that are on the early part of the growth curve, and entrepreneurship, which is earlier in the growth curve, and hopefully we can get up that curve. All of those need to be fueled by more research and commercialization. But there's a number of things you have to do that are enablers for every one of those. 2 of them speak to talent, people skills. One is the existing workforce and keep upgrading it. Another one is education attainment in total. And we have to have places, that quality places that people in growing companies want to be. We have to be connected with the rest of the world, both physically for ourselves and for the products we make and for the data that we share and move around the world. And we've got to have cost-efficient public policies, so forth. But the hardest thing of all, which is part of the point of this whole talk about collaboration, a lot of you in this room, if we spend a little bit of time, you would probably all have ideas on how to do this. But if you have ideas on how to do this, make sure you see me after the meeting. Develop the coalitions of business, philanthropic, education, and government leaders to monitor, refine, and deliver on the strategy. The collaboration point. We've figured out how to have a common marketing program. We've figured out how to attract companies together. We're collaborating on a bunch of things. But now we're talking about collaborating in the biggest way of all, which is a directional strategy for the big levers that have got to be pulled in this region. And so far, we're doing what I'll say is the easy work, which is to think about what you ought to do, but we actually have a team just working on this. Because if we can't do this, we can't do all of that. And we're going to have to invent even more ways of working together and getting cross-sector participation in this. So far, the people who have endorsed this and have actually been part of it, these are all the names of the organizations that are on that big wheel that I showed you with all the bubbles. Every one of them have passed a resolution endorsing the work so far, and so we're on our way there. I'm going to wrap up with just a couple slides on the growth of our economy and its outlook. And in fact, this may be a single slide. I just have 2 here and then we're done. The Moody'sEconomy.com is a financial service that does economic modeling, and through them we can get economic data for our 18-county region. And the very light blue bar, all these bars are what we call gross regional product. Very similar to gross domestic product that you hear about all the time. Same idea. Economic output, value added for a region. The light blue bars are the history. And it goes back to the early 90s, and during the 90s, growth was not so bad. The 2000s were essentially a lost decade economically, 2 recessions in there, and we're starting to claw ourselves back. According to Moody's Economy.com, we have an outlook of those purple bars on there. The growth rates are not particularly high, but compared to back here, this would be like boom times if we're growing at 2.5%, 3.5% year after year. There's one problem. In Moody's data, they do all that stuff, and they print out all the statistics and everything, and that it includes a number for the number of people working that are associated with that. Our unemployment rate would have to go to 0 to have enough people working to do all that work. And most of you probably know that that just doesn't happen. You know, full employment is no less than 4%. These days, probably 5.5% you'd probably call full employment. Today, we're, just around 7. We're only 1 percentage point, 1.5, 2 percentage points away from full employment. DAS forecast says we'd have to go to 0. In order to grow, we're at this very weird position, and another reason I'm glad the presidential campaign, or this kind of campaign's over, is that while politically we have to talk about jobs, the real issue is skills. We're about to have more jobs than skills. And that makes this institution very important. But the people we're all concerned about for the jobs are people that are not going to come to private four-year institutions. They're probably going to get into the community colleges so they can start to move up the ladder, which is where we really need them. So I am looking forward to the fact that we can kind of lower the rhetoric about jobs and turn the rhetoric more towards skill development, because if we do that, the economy will grow even faster, and frankly, we need to do that even to achieve that forecast. So where's that growth going to come from, according to Moody's, where this actually breaks down the economy into about 14 segments. And I'm not going to talk about all these individually, but you can eyeball some of the percentages. But right up there at the top, the biggest sector of the Northeast Ohio continues to be manufacturing. And over the 2011 to 2019 period, Moody's is projecting that manufacturing output in our region will grow 28%. What is noteworthy about that is it's faster than the US. More growth in manufacturing, a growth rate more in manufacturing than the US. Remember that growth curve and the leveling off? It has been 50 years probably since our manufacturing base in Northeast Ohio grew faster than the country. We've been growing slower than the country. Remember the 5-year increments of bars? We've been growing slower. Moody's modeling of this region now, with all the transformation it's gone through, is that we're going to grow in manufacturing faster than the US will grow in manufacturing. If they're right, that will be absolutely enormous, and it will be a testimony to the change and transformation and the new growth curve that we've been building painfully over the last 30 or 40 years here as we've been going through a transformation. So that's the reality of the region, a lot of the opportunities. I think the imperative that we've got to work together to do this. We could fall back and just do it by 400 little cities. And I think you all know that that's not a good option. Together we're going to win the race, but I always like to end with my friends Aaron, Jim, and Joyce, because these presentations always have lots of data in them, but in the end it's all about the people. These 3 people all have jobs because of companies that we've attracted here. And so they're such good people, they'd probably find a job somewhere. But it was a lot easier because Alphametric, Steel Warehouse, and Teletech are here. And so it's all about them. And with that, thank you for sitting through this extensive description of the region and how it operates and the opportunities that are here. I'd be glad to take questions as long as you'd like. We won't do that forever, and I can talk to more of you afterwards. Thank you. We allowed to take some questions, Linda? Okay, Phil?
Tom, you talked about regional competitiveness and our geography, the 43%, 44% of the population, as place-based competitiveness. Are there other place-based opportunities for Northeast Ohio? When I think about the lake, we think about our parks,
Yeah.
that are not easy to pull away from us.
Right.
Through capital, a startup moves away from
Yes.
capital.
Right. Yeah, I'd clearly add, it is one of the great things about our wonderful cultural institutions, because they don't pick up and move either, or our universities. These are real engines of innovation and knowledge creation and economic development. The lake, I probably get asked about more than anything else. It's a fabulous symbol of the fresh water we have here. I guess I don't know for sure about Berea, but my guess is that Berea does not get its water from the lake. Probably comes from underground. The reason we have lots of water here isn't because of the lake, it's because it rains a lot. And the reason why we have the lake is because it rains a lot. So we're not unique in having a lake. They have that in Chicago, and they have that in Milwaukee, and lots of other places. So there will be a day, and here's the day to watch, when you start hearing about communities in the Southeast or the Southwest, developers no longer expanding developments. When you hear that that's no longer happening, that's when the value of all the water around here will really start to go up. Last I checked, they're still doing that. And so it hasn't gotten to a critical point yet where that's been kept. I think the park and so forth, I hate, they are fabulous. But there is a saying in economic development that the quality of life is great everywhere. Any place where you have 1 million people living, it can't be that bad. So and we have 4 million people living here. I mean, so yes, those are good things, but businesses are not gonna come here because of our parks. Businesses come here to make money. Come here because people are smart, because you can get access to customers. You have a place here that's developing new technology. That's why businesses go to a place. So businesses are very pragmatic. But you want to have amenities. Remember, one of the strategies, quality of places where growing companies and talented people want to live. So we have to have that. We have to have the Gordon Square Art District. Those are very important because you want to be able to keep talented people here. So that's important, but it's an add-on. It's not it's not the fundamental drive. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of cities and regions are seeing an increase in the investment in their areas from outside the United States.
Sure.
And a lot of the different programs that we have going on in our region are bringing industries and investments from the U.S. Not that it's all bad that we have investments from outside the U.S. as well, but my understanding is that we're finding some of our investment coming domestically as well. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, Team Neo.
How much of it is a result of the initiatives?
Yeah. I mean, the U.S. is, of course, such a giant economy that there's more opportunities to attract business within the U.S. than elsewhere, which is more expensive. It's hard to find them. However, at Team Neo, we have an individual, Bernadine van Kessel, who's from the Netherlands. Her full-time job is to attract businesses here from outside the U.S. So we have a formal strategy. It's one of our channels that is for international. We know that there are international people who just find us anyway. It's why the websites are so important. You sell yourself first on the website because people making a location decision go online, do their own research. And so we do a lot of international work. Probably 25% of the deals we do in attraction every year are international companies. So we have a fairly balanced activity there, actually. But there's no doubt there's more. It's easier to find them in the U.S. But it's a
25% is outside, that means 75% is coming from inside.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a pretty good balance, and those international companies bring tremendous vibrancy and additional, just diverse ideas and culture. I mean, they're terrific assets to have here and to make our community more global and used to thinking globally. So thanks for asking about that. I saw another hand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, on a comment you made earlier, there's been a lot of talk about the upper echelon of Cleveland in the area and bringing the talent here, but how do you see the lower class and some of the community college students, how do you see them working into the simulation of the economy from your perspective and from Team NEO's perspective? I'm just wondering how the bottom half fits into it. You know?
Yeah, exceedingly important. We've got a few people around here with some gray hair or no hair. If you guys are associated with manufacturing businesses, any of you associated with manufacturing companies, how you doing in finding skilled workers?
Well, they're going pretty guns right now. They can't find enough employees sometimes.
Can't find enough employees. Having the same problem? Okay. The people coming out of the community colleges actually is where we have the shortage. I hate to tell you this, but we don't have so much of a shortage of people coming out of four-year institutions. What we actually have a shortage of today are people who can do plumbing, electricity, welding. That's actually where we have the shortage. It is unbelievably ironic, and it's worse than that, because ironic is too distant. It is a tragedy that we have kids dropping out of school by the hundreds in Northeast Ohio because they think there isn't an opportunity, and all they have to do today, all you have to do to get a good job is to get a commercial driver's license. That's all you have to do. People will line up to hire you. There's a shortage of truck drivers. As the shale drilling gets going, they're gonna be pulling truck drivers because they move all the stuff around by truck. There's a tremendous number of relatively low-skilled jobs out there. But there are but what there's even more of are these semi-skilled where you need an associate degree or a certificate in something. And for kids to be dropping out of school because they think there's no opportunity, when companies, you heard a couple guys talk, are crying for people, just go get training as a welder. People will line up to hire you. How can we let that happen? Kids not knowing that that's the case. It tells you just how intractable our poverty problem is, that word is not penetrating that community, that opportunity is there. And it's a gigantic issue. As I said, we don't have enough people. So we've got to get those people into the system. And our community colleges are terrific places for that to happen. And it's more reachable, it's more attainable. In those communities, they never even imagine they can go to Baldwin Wallace. That just seems like that's impossible. But maybe they've heard about Tri-C, and maybe they can go there, like Frank Jackson, now the mayor, who wandered into, because his mother told him he had to, wandered into Tri-C there in the central neighborhood and said, "What do you people do here?" That was after he came back from Vietnam. His mother told him to go in there. He had no idea what happened there. And he went in and said, "What do you people do here?" And he eventually got a degree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to figure out a way to get these kids into the system. That's why inclusion is one of the planks of the strategy. How about another? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if you could give us any more details of that movie's forecast of manufacturing, where it comes from. If the reasons for that forecast are the same as yours, and
yeah, by and large, and the data actually disaggregates into about 15 different types of manufacturing, and then there's even subcategories in there. The chemical industry looks very strong in there, and coatings. Polymer industry looks pretty strong in there, which is great. Believe it or not, even over the history, and I didn't show you the history because there's only so much you can do that I'd want to subject you to, But actually, our manufacturing output over the last 25 years, surprisingly, is essentially flat. It's not down. We all believe it's down a lot. Jobs are down. Probably 35% less people working in manufacturing, but the output is about the same as what it was 25 years ago. And part of, when you disaggregate that, what you see is that sort of the big commodity things have really gone down, even in output, like steel production, even though we still do some. That's down a lot. But metal working has continued to grow. So the value added being made, making things out of metal actually shows pretty good outlook, even though the basic steel production is down. So yeah, there's data in there that disaggregates that, and instrumentation and control systems, biomedical devices, which is like the poster child for us, right? We got these great research medical institutions, and we know how to make stuff. Put them together, you got medical devices. Huge opportunity for us here, because it builds on two of the strengths we have in a new way. Yes, sir.
As you've addressed the community college levels, but you look at the public school situation, the primary education, secondary education in the Cleveland area, and looking at those target populations with minorities, the diversity, how does primary education fit into any of its mission and activities?
Well, one of our planks is education attainment. It's easier to say what the planks ought to be than to know how to change. There have been decades now of education reform efforts. Some of them have somewhat helped, but many haven't. The retooling of the system in the Cleveland municipal school system is very encouraging. Passage of the levy yesterday is huge news for this entire region, not just the kids inside the city of Cleveland, but it will have an effect all the way around. It's a smarter, freer, more flexible system. I hesitate to get too philosophical or getting into agendas, but if you've want a glimpse at the challenges in K through 12 education, rent the movie Waiting for Superman. Any of you seen that? A few of you have? I mean, I think I'm still shaking from having watched that. And it's pretty realistic. It's all documentary. I believe the whole system needs to be blown up. Unless you have a system, an organization that is constantly challenged from the outside to change itself and evolve and so forth, it will eventually become so hidebound that it'll become completely unproductive. And for the most part, urban education in the United States is in that state. It's so structured with rules and legalities that we've completely lost the effect of what's happening on the kids. And that's why a lot of the reform efforts really have not succeeded, because you can't penetrate that structure that's there. So I don't know the exact right way what we ought to have, but I think you can spot a dysfunctional organization when you see one. And Waiting for Superman, I think, will convince you that a lot of places just frankly need to be blown up. But Cleveland, the new model in Cleveland is one of the most bold reform attempts that's going on anywhere in the country. So let's all hope that that one really works, because it could be a model again for the whole region. Critical. One more, yes, sir.
What are your feelings on the defeat of the Port Authority issue just yesterday?
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate. I know the folks at the Port Authority quite well. I don't know all the reasons. They've had various kinds of publicity in recent years. Maybe that was an effect. Maybe it was hard running, getting people to both vote for at least in Cleveland, to vote for the school levy as well as a port levy. The plans they had in mind for that money made complete sense. We need to protect that river and the banks and so forth. I think it was a very thoughtful program they had in mind, and they're going to have to get back out and sell it. but it's not real visible to a lot of people. For those of us who are kind of downtown and around all that, we see it all the time. But if you're not there that much, it's like, what is this thing? So I think they got caught up. There was no organized opposition. Their polling said it was very positive, but boy, they got clobbered. So yeah, I think they obviously got to go back to the drawing board, and I hope that they will come back, because the program, particularly for protecting the banks of the river, is very important. Something we really need to do in the community. Thank you all very much. Bless you all.